Okay, thank you everyone for joining us today. We're going to begin now. Welcome to our webinar on new models in mobility management. I would like to ask that you give us some focused attention today because there's a lot of content we're going to cover, and it's very, very good and recent and meaningful content. And so if you have any cell phones you might put on silent or vibrate. If you have any chat programs open, you might want to just, bow out of there for a few minutes now as we begin. And so let's try to focus in as we have a really awesome presenter today, Phil Caruso. I'm going to just say a few words about Phil and then bring him on next. Phil has a lot of experience in our industry. He has a history with mobility providers and other services providers like Movero and Visage and MTS. And Phil has been with Sakon for the last 6 years as a mobility solutions expert. He also has a lot of history in TEM and fixed services and some other areas, but has had a primary focus in our mobility engagements. He knows the business well, top to bottom, can answer any questions you have. So don't forget, we're going to accept questions via the chat today. And if you don't know how that operates, it's off to the right and there's a little orange handle and you can open that up and pick the chat icon and then send us any questions and we'll answer those at the end. And so as we begin, please welcome Phil Caruso.
Well, thank you for that warm introduction, Arthur. I hope I live up to it. Thank you all for joining us today. Today, mobility is really central in any enterprise's technology roadmap. And what I'm going to do today is to talk about, why do we look at mobility from the enterprise perspective in the first place? I'm going to look back at the evolution of mobility, as Arthur said, and if you start doing the math with all this stuff, I lived through a lot of this, so I'm sort of recounting sort of how it went, so if I get a little too Grandpa Simpson, just send something in the comments. So then we're going to look about some of the other enterprise models like BYOD, this emerging service device as a service model, what it is and why people are looking at that. And what we see is the true emerging model in mobility, the model that we at Sakon call hybrid mobility. So I think, as Stephen Covey would say, you begin with the end in mind. And we tend to lose focus, especially when we're managing mobility day to day, of why we do it in the first place. And there's three things that I think are top of mind for me when I think about why we do mobility in the enterprise. First off is productivity. If all this stuff doesn't make it your workers able to do more work and better work in less time, then it's not worth the investment. So is what you're doing making people more productive? The second thing is, are you supporting the new mobile workforce? And by mobile, what I mean is that according to statistics, over 40% of the workforce is going to work remote, at least part-time, by the end of this decade. So people just aren't coming into the office, showing up at 8:30, leaving at 5. Work has evolved, and the expectations have evolved around that. So it used to be, if you called after 5, you got voicemail and somebody got back to you the next day. Now, people have been sort of trained to expect an instant response. And so you need to give your employees tools to be that responsive and to keep up with the market in that sense. And the last one is making employees happy, employee satisfaction. And let me expand on that a little, because I think that's a really important part of this. Employees today are really demanding the best tools out there. And it's important in essentially a full employment economy that we need to keep our people. And Unisys did a terrific report, the new digital workplace divide. You can get it on their website, and I recommend it. It's not that long, and it's got some great information in it. But some of the things that struck me is that the organizations that invest in technology have much better results than the organizations that don't. And part of that is that when, users are sort of fighting the technology, they're not getting work done for you. And, this amazing statistic of 10% of workers leaving a job because they're frustrated by the technology. When you have a full employment economy and people are hard to come by, you don't want to have to replace people because, they're using a 3 or 4 year old cell phone. So you want to make sure that people have the right tools to do their job well. And that's really where enterprise mobility got started. So let me take you back about 20 years or so to where this all began. And it began with essentially a glorified pager. This was introduced in 1999. This is the RIM 850. It wasn't called a BlackBerry yet. The BlackBerry name was a nickname that came because the keys reminded them of blackberry seeds, and the name stuck. And that's why we refer to this as a BlackBerry. And it's hard to imagine in this day and age how revolutionary this device was. Now, think of it, in the late 90s, most people had just gotten high-speed internet in their houses. That was not a thing until the late 90s. And Wi-Fi was still a couple of years off from widespread use. So the idea of being anywhere and getting your email was just incredible. And you can see why these quickly became called crackberries, because you had this level of connection with the rest of the world that you'd never really had before. Then in 2002, they made it even better. They added a phone. So now you could make calls and get email remotely wherever you were. They were not the only player in this. Palm had taken the popular Palm Pilot, added a phone to that, and became the Trio. Windows, you had the Windows CE platform. They added a phone to that. It became Windows Mobile. And Nokia, a longtime provider of cell phones, also had their Symbian operating system that did a lot of those same things in Symbian. Now, as far as the enterprise was concerned, these were not all that hard to maintain. For one thing, they were only used by people who wanted them, people who were technical, people who knew what they were doing. So all you needed to do was give them the phones and they would figure it out. They were the early adopters. They were willing to sort of work stuff out themselves. And from an infrastructure standpoint, once you set up a BES server for the BlackBerries or a good server for the others, things were pretty easy to manage. And people saw how productive this made them. And they decided that everybody should have one. And so this is where we came into the whole managed mobility services. This is why they were created. What people realized was they had to take the same practices that they had been using to support PCs and start using them to support mobile devices. So you started to get help desks getting a lot of calls from mobile users. Now, the one difference between a smartphone and a desktop device is they have carrier services. And one of the reasons that companies rose up to do mobility support is that the corporate help desk did not want to get into dealing with the carrier stuff. You know, if you manage a corporate help desk and you have somebody who has to leave and, get on a call with a carrier for 25 minutes, it just messes up the rest of the help desk. So you saw a lot of people outsourcing services at this time. But this is really generation one of MMS. Then, in 2007, there were two major events that were going to reshape the mobility world forever. First, a scrappy software company in Concord, Massachusetts, introduced Mobile Manager. It was a SaaS system that combined expense management and procurement in a single, easy-to-use package. And some guy in California put a phone on a digital music player and called it an iPhone. Now, the iPhone, we, now think of it as being just wonderful, and it was always wonderful. But when it first came out, it wasn't that great. I know that's heresy, but it just really wasn't. I know this is one of those things, I didn't buy stock in X. I didn't take the iPhone seriously as somebody who was in the field at the time. And why would I? It didn't have 3G data support. It didn't support corporate push email. You couldn't do attach files in an email. It didn't do MMS. It didn't even have cut and paste. There was a lot of issues with it, but it did have two things that nobody else had. One, a very elegant interface, and two, an excellent mobile browser. And it was coming into a world really focused on the consumer, whereas all these other devices had been focused on the enterprise. Mike Lazaridis, the president of RIM, later BlackBerry, famously said when people were razzing him about the fact that, the early BlackBerries were black and white, he's like, why do you need to read your email in color? There was just this, it was very much a business-oriented device. There was Brick Breaker, but other than that, very much all work, no play. The iPhone was very different. But competitors did emerge because this was a huge hit from the very beginning. So what you see with the competitors is you had a bunch of phones come out and then quickly die. And this was the period between, say, 2008 and 2012. And the churn that you saw in this market was amazing. So AT&T was the first carrier to have the iPhone, and it was a big hit for AT&T. It was such a big hit, it really pretty much destroyed their network. If you were around at that time, you remember that every time you were on the phone with somebody who had an iPhone, their call would drop. No matter, when they made the call, it always dropped. So all of the other carriers wanted to get in on this action. So Verizon was out of the gate with the BlackBerry Storm, which was BlackBerry's answer to the iPhone. And, if there's anybody here from Verizon or anybody who had to support the Storm in a corporate capacity, they're probably having like PTSD flashbacks. I'm sorry. Sprint hitched their wagon to the Palm Pre. And truth be told, the Palm Web OS was probably the most elegant solution that came out. Unfortunately, it just didn't have the juice behind it to really move the needle. T-Mobile introduced the first Android device, but it was not a huge hit, mainly because T-Mobile was not big as a carrier at that time. Nokia made enhancements to Symbian, and Windows introduced the new Windows Phone. This was supposed to be the corporate device. This was the one that was going to take over the world. And if you ever want to get a Gartner or IDC analyst annoyed, remind them of what their predictions were in terms of Windows Phone market share for 2015. It was somewhere around like 40-50%. Didn't quite happen that way. As a matter of fact, it didn't quite happen for any of these devices. Nokia, they gave up in 2011 and went to selling Windows Phone devices. Not their best decision. Palm was purchased by HP and then quickly retired. That also went away in 2011. BlackBerry actually had a resurgence or continued to grow after the iPhone was released. And we'll talk about that a little when we're talking about managing it. But it was mainly something that it was more inertia than anything else. It was taking the established base of enterprises using BlackBerry and expanding it within that universe. But they weren't really responsive to what was going on with the consumery aspects of the devices. They had color screens now, and they had cameras, but they were late adopters in all of these things, and they never did get the browser right. So BlackBerry essentially faded away as a competitor. And then even Windows Phone just a couple years ago, Microsoft sort of threw in the towel on that. So you really had just Android compete with the iPhone. But you really can't give credit to that original Android phone. The phone that really did it for Android was the Motorola Droid. And if you were around at the time, you remember that Verizon had this huge marketing campaign around the Droid. And it really, this is the machine, this is the device that really got into the corporate marketplace for Android. And when you look at the numbers, and this is just a small sample, but if you think about the fact that the iPhone is introduced here, the original Android phone is introduced here. This is when the Droid comes out around here, and you can just see everything sort of exploded after that. So in a couple of years, you're down to sort of a two-player world, iOS and Android. But all of this change made mobility management a lot more complicated, and we went through a number of years where it was really not clear, what was the best way to manage all this. At first, companies really wanted to try to stick to standards. So you had people, you had a lot of pressure sort of from below of people who wanted to bring, iPhones and Android phones into the workplace. And it was like, no, we're going to stick with our BlackBerries. We need the security. We need the consistency. We cannot support sort of a more diverse environment. And those early Android and iOS phones, to be honest, were not really all that enterprise friendly. They were designed as consumer devices first. So they really needed time to mature to get things like really robust native email support. And they needed side products like MDM systems to develop to really provide the controls and security that an enterprise requires. One thing that did happen, though, is that data prices or data costs just skyrocketed because data usage skyrocketed. The BlackBerry had been designed at a time when data was very expensive and very slow. So it was designed to use as little data as possible. The Android and iOS phones, having full robust browsers and no restrictions that way, used a whole bunch more data. And so people had to respond to this. And so it took them a while to sort of figure out what they should be getting from the carrier and what was realistic in this new age. You also had the emergence of new device types, tablets. So the iPad came out in 2010, as did the first Samsung Galaxy Tab, and of course the BlackBerry Playbook. Does anybody remember the BlackBerry Playbook? It's actually a cool device in its own way. But the thing that really changed the world was what I call the app explosion. The App Store was a refinement of iOS. I think it was in the second version of iOS. And it really changed the way that people use mobile devices. It went from being a tool, that you use just to check your mail and to, make sure you got to your appointments. And it became, this is how your phone became the one thing that you needed to have 24/7 on your person. So it replaced not only your Rolodex, but it replaced your GPS. Your phone replaced your tape measure. It even replaced your wallet. It really became the go-to device for everything that you had to do in your life. And because people started to have sort of this tight relationship with their phone, it made it really hard to have two phones, like a work phone and a non-work phone. You really wanted to have your entire life in one place. And so there was a lot of pressure to sort of get to a point where you could have a single device that was good for business and also good for all the other stuff that you wanted to do, from Facebook to Snapchat to whatever. And the tools did catch up. So over time, like by 2014, 2015, I say that we're at generation 2 of mobility management. Things have stabilized in terms of the OS. The devices are more consistent, so you don't have all of these, especially the early days of Android, where you had all sorts of different form factors and nobody knew sort of what was going to win. You have your players. You have MDMs that have come remarkably far in terms of their capabilities. And you have better internal security within the OS itself. So these things are now ready for prime time. So this is really where we are now, but it's not where we're going to stay. And that's due to what I call the smartphone singularity. Now, this isn't Kurzweil's The Singularity. Let's consider it a singularity. And that is that 77% of Americans own a smartphone. And if you're looking at the white-collar workforce, you're really at 100%. So everybody has a smartphone. Even that annoying retired couple on the consumer cellular ads now has a smartphone. And it's really changed the way that we interact with both the digital world and the physical world. One of the effects of this singularity is that we now have a generation that has grown up in an era where they don't remember when they didn't have a smartphone. And I've lived through this myself with 3 daughters. And I might know my oldest got her first smartphone. It was a BlackBerry when she was a freshman in college. If you ask my children, they were always the last to get anything. That was because she needed BBM, BlackBerry Messenger. And it was because everybody in school had it and she needed it to do projects. But by the time that her younger sisters came up, they had iPhones by the time they were sophomores in high school. And they just graduated from college. So they've essentially had a smartphone, for their entire adolescence. And because of this, they come to the office environment, they come into the workforce with a way of doing, basically a way of living that involves their phone. And so you can't just give them another device. They want to incorporate their work life into the life they've already established using the phone that they have. And they're going to get very frustrated if you don't allow them to do that. Another thing that came out of this singularity is that the devices are becoming more expensive. Back when Apple and Samsung, who had double-digit growth year over year, quarter over quarter of new devices going out there, they could pretty much keep the price level and still keep having increasing profits. But as we've reached a point where everybody's already got a smartphone, it's really, their growth has been pretty flat. And so now, and the other thing is the phones haven't changed all that much. If you look for example, at an iPhone 8, it doesn't look a heck of a lot different than an iPhone 7, which doesn't look a heck of a lot different than an iPhone 6. So it's harder and harder to come up with the you got to buy me factor in these new phones. And so they come out with things like better cameras or animojis, but those things are very expensive. The quality of the camera that Apple puts into an iPhone 10, for example, is pretty expensive. And not everybody needs portrait mode. But how does this affect the standard devices that enterprises buy? Well, if you're a typical enterprise, you're getting new devices for your team every couple of years. So say I'm up for a new device, and I'm looking at the current crop of Apple devices, like the new iPhone XR, and it's going to be $749. Now, if I'm coming into an iPhone XR, I probably got a new phone 2 years ago, and that would have been an iPhone 7, and that was $649. So it's gone up about $100 in the past 2 years. That's about 15%. And that's really, and yes, I know the new iPhone is better than the old iPhone, but really that's pretty apples to apples. It gets really dramatic when you look at the previous generation. So before I had my iPhone 7, I had an iPhone 6, and I got that for $199, $299 if I splurged and got the 32 gig one. So you can see there's been a tremendous increase in the prices that enterprises have to pay to get these devices. So that leaves the enterprise with a few challenges. The first, it's harder and harder to enforce external standards because the user community wants what it wants. It has an established way of doing things that exists outside of the workplace. These devices are not just for business, they're for everything. Your entire life now is run on your device. And it's not a luxury. Your customers are expecting your people to be available all the time, to be that responsive. You need to give them the tools so that they can, at any place, at any time, respond to whatever challenges that come up. And old devices just aren't going to cut it. When people bring out their device at a party or, on the train, whatever, they don't want something that's embarrassing. They want something that's cool. And if you are giving your employees, older devices, it's going to lead to some dissatisfaction. So there's a couple of ways that enterprises are responding to all these challenges. One is our old friend BYOD. And I say our old friend because we've had BYOD since the beginning. I mean, when we were just buying cell phones for the enterprise, most of those were BYOD. There was just a few people who were authorized to have cell phones, and generally they expensed it, and that was it. But then as it became more ubiquitous, the limitations of BYOD around compliance and making sure that you were meeting all of the laws became more challenging. But you can see that Gartner is predicting that 75% of smartphones will be BYOD by 2022, which is a pretty large number. So why are we swinging back to BYOD? Well, before, everything was kind of hazy about BYOD rules and regulations. Now it's a little clearer. True, BYOD rules change from one jurisdiction to another, but they're pretty much consistent within that jurisdiction. It's not as hazy now as far as what is expected legally and from accounting practices for BYOD. And both the OS and the MDM tools have gotten to a point that make it better and more secure to have BYOD. Before, when you were pretty much just using Microsoft ActiveSync and just letting people just hook whatever device up to your Exchange server, that was not a secure setting. MDM has made it secure. Now, one thing that MDM has tended to do is say that if you have an MDM system, you're set for BYOD, and that's not true, because that does help you in terms of security, but it doesn't help you in terms of your compliance issues and your governance issues. And this is really the challenge that still remains with BYOD right now, is you can't have a really good BYOD program unless you have the governance in place. And what I mean by governance is the rules for, who's eligible for a BYOD device. What do they need to provide to be eligible for the BYOD device? And once they provide it, how do they know they're in the program? How do they know they're getting their stipend? There's not any transparency for the employees. And for the enterprise, there's not really been a lot of tools that show you sort of what you're paying out for BYOD, and that can compare that to what you were paying for your corporate liable environment, so that you really can't see the ROI. So you need to use a tool set that will allow you to do all of this, to manage all of the eligibility requirements. It's not enough to have eligibility requirements. You have to have some way of managing them. It can't be done manually. You need to make sure they're shared with the team, and you have to make sure that they're accepted. And if you want to do things like collect an invoice for validation, you want to have an easy way to do that. You don't want this to become a real burden for your employees, because you will have an employee revolt, and that's going to hurt your employee satisfaction. And you want to be able to see what you're spending so that you understand what the total cost of your mobility program is. Now, another solution that is starting to emerge now is mobile device as a service. And essentially, you know, when a phone costed $199, it wasn't so bad, you know, writing out that check for $199 every 2 years. But now, just to show you, you know, what is going on with phone prices, the new iPhone X or XS Max, 256 gig, is $1,249. A MacBook Pro 256 gig is $1,299. So it's essentially the same price as a MacBook. And if you compare that to like a Dell or an HP laptop, it's considerably more expensive. So companies are looking for a way to, you know, spread that cost out a little so that they're not having to come up with all that money up front and tie up all that capital in buying phones. MDS also gives you some freedom from carrier contracts, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but it allows you to sort of, you know, bring on and bring off phones without having a specific phone tied to a specific line of service. Device as a service is more than just a lease, though. It generally comes with a suite of services, including deployment, ongoing help desk, break-fix support, and end-of-life logistics. So this takes some of the burden off of your IT team, allows them to do more strategic things, while your device as a service provider takes care of some of the logistics. And it gives you, because you're on a contract with a specific length, whether it's 18 months, 2 years, 30 months, you have sort of an automated schedule of refreshes, and you can do that in a really smooth way so that you make sure that you're keeping your team up with the highest level of technology, keeping them with that cool device throughout throughout the life cycle. And one of the things that people do not realize, I know this was kind of news to me, is that there is a charge. There is a difference in the cost when you have a carrier-provided device versus when you bring a device to the carrier and say, give me a SIM, I'm going to just light it up on this particular phone. And you can see this is from AT&T's public website. So this is not anybody's contract or anything. This is just sort of rack rates. And you can see that it's $25 more if you've got a service commitment because you've purchased a phone. So this is a really really interesting charge that most people just aren't aware of. So we did a little research here on some of our customers and looked at what this kind of thing is looking at. Now, for example, we had an engineering firm that's using the COPE model, corporate owned, personally enabled, which is the model where you've got corporate liable service costs, but the end user purchases the device. So what was happening is they were purchasing the device from the carrier, and the customer thought, well, gee, I'm not paying anything for this device, so this is great. But they were, because they were paying that extra charge every month from the carrier that they were not really aware of. And you can see, that was about $15,000 a month. And had they bought those devices outside, they could have put them on different plans that were cheaper. And they wouldn't have had to worry about ETFs or anything like that because they wouldn't have the contract commitments. So this MDS model works across a lot of different stakeholder groups within the enterprise. Procurement, it gives them a better negotiating power with the carrier because they're going to focus on just getting the service. They're not going to have the contract confused by device subsidies or something like that. It's like, okay, I'm buying service from you. This is what carriers do. you give me your pricing. And of course, there's no upfront capital expense because they're financing the device. For IT finance, it gives them a consistent cost every month for the mobility devices, a cost that's going to stay pretty much consistent over time, or at least not go up as dramatically as the price of devices, because everything is sort of smoothed out over an 18, 24, 30-month window. And finally, because a lot of services generally come with device as a service offering, it takes some work off of IT. So what we at Sakon are seeing emerge in all of this is a hybrid mobility model. We do not think that, I think the time has passed where an enterprise can say, we're going to go all BYOD, or everything's going to be corporate liable. I think you're seeing an era where you're going to have a variety of different management models depending on the use case within the company. So you might have, some devices that you just do traditional corporate liable. You may have other devices that are BYOD. There might be some devices that you put into an MDS program. But no matter how you build this hybrid model, it's only effective if you manage it as a unit. So you want to have a single platform that provides a single window into all of your mobile devices, your entire mobile fleet, regardless of the purchasing and procurement model that you're using to bring them on. So you want to have them all in an inventory. You want to have visibility into procurement and end user ticketing. So giving the end user visibility into what's going on with their devices. You want it integrated with your MDM platform. You want it to be able to manage the entitlements and the stipends that go along with a BYOD program. And you want to be able to optimize costs. If you're paying the carrier, you want to make sure that those costs are minimized. You want to be able to allocate costs across all of these different platforms, and you want to make sure that it's integrated with your HR and financial systems so that you can keep everything very tightly managed and you don't end up with orphaned devices that nobody knows who's responsible for them. Gee, you'd need to have a great platform that could do this. And, Sakon happens to have one. You didn't think you were going to get through this without some sort of an ad, did you? We have our Synchronized Database brings all these different sources of data together and puts them into a single place. So whether you're using traditional CL devices, device as a service device, or BYOD devices, you can see them all in one place. And it brings in the financial data and the MDM data and the ticketing data so that you have a complete picture of everything that's going on in your mobile environment. And then we have a series of applications that run on that and help you to manage your mobile fleet effectively. So just to sum up some of the recommendations that we have for you, going back, look at what you have now. So review how you're managing your current mobility fleet. Do you have BYOD in place? How are you managing that? What are you looking at in terms of the next 24 months for mobility in your organization? And how are you paying for all your equipment? How much are you paying for equipment versus services? Have you looked at, what you're paying per device for your mobile devices? Look at your carrier plans and your contracts, and what would the impact be if you were to bring the devices from outside, and what would your rate structure look like? Talk to your users. As I said at the beginning, this is all about making your users happy and productive. So find out what they like about what you're doing now, where they have problems, get their feedback and use it to make improvements. Take your users and take that feedback and look at the use cases that they have for mobility and create user profiles. So look at different classes of users within your organization, see what the similarities are and sort of group them together, and then figure out what model works best for that particular group of users. And don't be afraid to have different models for different users, because you're going to have a great platform like Sakon, for example, that can bring all this into a single window. So you don't have to come up with your own, you don't have to bring everybody into one thing to see it all. You can use the platform to do that. Optimize the plans or the usage, the plans and model for the way that people are using the devices. And make sure you have that single source. You want to have that single system of record. So no matter where the device came from, whether it's corporate liable, BYOD, device as a service, or even just a Wi-Fi in-building device, that you see it all in a single place. So that's what I had. Thank you very much. I hope that was useful. Arthur, did we get any questions?
We did. And Phil, I wanted to offer the attendees a special treat. I want to just share a modification of this slide that adds a link where they can go to a page. And so I'm just going to send a chat to everyone. And so if you want to just click it in your chat, it might just open up your browser and take you there. But if you, and this is Arthur talking again, but if you go to the bit.ly/Sakon-MDAS-overview, I put that on the screen if you needed to jot it down instead of clicking it. And I just sent it out in the chat to everyone. That's where you can get a copy of this page. You'll land on this page here, and if you just click this image, you can, without even opting in, you can get a copy of the overview document. If you have more questions and you want to talk to Phil, you can just fill out this form, and then he's a pretty nice guy to deal with. I can tell you that I've worked with him for years, and he will absolutely be attentive to your questions and your needs. If you have questions for your company and you want to explore some of these mobility programs, feel free to fill in the opt-in at the right, and then Phil will get that and he'll contact you. Now, in the meantime, I wanted you to also be able to copy down Phil's contact information. He's the vice president of our mobility programs here at Sakon. His telephone number and his email is on the screen. And I wanted to remind everyone that we're going to take some questions now and discuss them briefly. And so if you have any questions, please send them in the chat. One thing that I did get asked if we're recording this, and we are, and we will be able to provide for you a link in a follow-up message that'll take you to the recording. Might be a day or so following the end of this session, but we will make that available. And then I also got a request for a copy of the deck. If that's the case, we'll host it and we'll include that link in the same follow-up email. And so then let's see, we do have some questions coming in. So let's see here take me just a second. So I believe from Steve, we got a question. Thank you, Steve. What type of pricing are we seeing at the unit level for MDAS service? So in other words, on a per line or per service basis, are we getting back the $25 is really the focus of his question. And how much does MDAS ultimately cost? So this is kind of getting into the practical matters of
No,
and that's that 25 back that you mentioned, Phil.
Yeah, so the 25 covers a good chunk of it. Obviously, it's going to be different based on, if you're deploying, an iPhone 10R versus a 10s Max, there's going to be some differences there. There's also services generally bundled into MDAS. But if you look at the combination of the price of the device that you would be paying now, like if you were just doing the 24-month, no finance charge stuff that the carriers offer, add that to the amount of extra that you're paying in the plan, you're coming out ahead with an MDAS offer that includes the device and a full suite of services like help desk and deployment services. So it can be a very cost-effective option. That's why you really want to be looking at what you're paying now and figure that out, so that when you're evaluating an MDAS solution, you can compare apples to apples and figure out exactly the services that overlap and what would be included.
So it sounds like the short answer is yes, there's a price benefit, and it depends because the particular plans and the particular numbers are different for every enterprise.
Yeah, so I mean, it depends on the device. The services that you sign up for, the length of term that you sign up for, and of course, the cost of the device.
Great, thank you. We have another question, Phil. Let's see, regarding the hybrid models. Can you name a scenario, give us some details of like what hybrid would look like? Where would you use one and where would you use a different model, and how can they go together?
Yeah. So, I mean, Gartner is saying that like 75% of the devices are going to be BYOD, but there's a whole other 25% there. I think what you're going to see, and this is just sort of an educated guess, is that, devices that have a single purpose. So, a lot of enterprises have tablets that they're putting out that are app specific, in hospitals, in schools, in field service, where, those single service devices will probably remain corporate liable. What you'll see BYOD is more the consumer-y devices that people are carrying every day. So people will come into the enterprise with their phone already. When they join the company, they'll be put onto the corporate MDM. They'll have certain corporate apps that are put on their device. But, that way the enterprise doesn't have to deploy a new device for that employee. They just sort of take the device that they have, because at this point, everybody has one anyway.
Great, thank you. I got a question from Richard about SIMs. How do we view eSIMs and dual SIMs in phones impacting corporations in the future? And I'm not sure the adoption is at a level that it's going to disrupt yet, but I would imagine, Phil, that's going to be quite disruptive in the future.
It will be once they get it right. I mean, one of the big technology advancements of the new iPhone is the ability to take multiple SIMs in the new XS and XS Max. But the second SIM being an eSIM. But I think that we need to see some of that mature before we can really understand, the impact that's going to have. And I think we're going to have to see how carriers, how much carriers are going to support on the eSIM thing. I mean, conceivably, if you had like a pure eSIM environment, you would be able to switch devices onto different carriers very easily. You could have two phone numbers on a device very easily. I think that those things are coming. I think we're still a couple years out before you're really seeing the impact of that in the corporate space.
Thanks, Phil. Lisa asked, who are some of the MDS players? But Lisa, I'm not sure if you're referring to providers like we are in the MDS management, or the finance companies and the channels through which you can, make a deal for mobile device as a service. So Phil, any insight on who the emerging players are?
Well, I mean, Sakon can definitely hook you up in that way. Some of the mobile services companies have their own MDAS programs, companies like Stratix and Honeywell Enterprise Mobility, and also some of the big players that are doing DAS for IT are also doing it for telecom as well. So like a Pomeroy or a Unisys that might be doing it for desktops might also be expanding into mobility as well. I know HP also has a device as a service, so you may see them in that place as well. But talk to us. We can certainly give you some give you some a really compelling MDS offer.
Tim asked, and I'm not sure I understand what he means by A-grade devices to provide or have available for enterprise clients. So as opposed to the lower cost, are you seeing where the top tier devices are going to be available in such a program? I would think that would depend on the companies.
Are you talking about A-grade in terms of like refurbished devices?
I'm not sure, Tim, if you could clarify. I'm not quite sure the kinds of devices you're
because I mean, I definitely see a place for refurb devices in this. You know, one of the things, I'm a big fan of refurb devices because, especially right now, we're just about to start. You know, iPhone goes into the pool season, where all enterprises see this every year. The new iPhones go out, and magically, somebody destroys their iPhone. We find, my experience has been that when you have a program that replaces like for like, or even more fiendishly, like with like minus one generation, and say, okay, use this phone until you know your contract is up. That tends to keep the devices healthier. So, you know, I'm a big fan of the refurbished devices. I think you will see people doing leasing around refurb devices and programs around that for maybe things like you know, temporary use devices, you know, seasonal devices, things like that, where you want to get a big flock of devices for a limited amount of time. This would definitely be a lower cost alternative than using brand new devices for that purpose.
So Tim did clarify, and that was exactly it, the refurb. My bad on misunderstanding what he meant. Ryan asked, does the customer purchase phones via capital expenditure on their own and then come to Sakon for MDAS, or do you cover the procurement process of the devices as well?
No, we cover the procurement process as well. So we would procure the devices, we would set them up, we would do all of that, and the sort of the financing is a part of the larger offer.
And that's one of the benefits to the Office of the CFO is that on the books, the capital expenditure is no longer in play. A true MDAS engagement would be an operational expense, would it not?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, so the accounting would be different.
An expert on GAAP approved processes, but yeah.
My understanding is that it would be CapEx is no longer, when you do this program the right way, it's structured as an OpEx expense. So, you know, depending on the organization, they may like that. So it's something to note. And then one other from Steve was, are the ancillary services you mentioned, like help desk and others, are they required typically, or are they available a la carte? He asked.
It really depends on the provider. Everybody's got their own bundle of services. So, you know, you will find, we offer sort of a la carte services so that you can plug in the services that make most sense for you. You know, if there's certain things that you want to handle in-house or you have another vendor for, we're able to plug that in there. It's really a subscription. It's really more of a subscription model. So it's the combination of the devices and some set of services, but those services can vary.
And so if I need recycling, but I have a help desk, I'm okay then?
Yes.
One more question regarding Bring Your Own and stipends.
Mm-hmm.
Do you handle stipend management? And if so, do you recommend differing levels or a complex system, or can you accommodate that, or is it just one version of stipend for Bring Your Own?
Yeah, one of the nice things about our solution, and I think a requirement of any solution, and it's got to be able to support the governance rules that you put in place as an organization. So if you decide that you want to give certain classes of users one level, another class of users another level, you want to make sure that the solution that you choose allows you to have this tier model built in, so that you can, based on the HR feed, determine who gets what based on their role and their location in the organization.
And I want to thank everyone today. The engagement level is really high, and that's so awesome. One last question from Juan. At the end of the day, who would own the equipment or the devices? Does another party own it, or does the company own it?
The company does not own the device. It's part of the subscription, so it is not it would not be a corporate-owned device. It would be owned by the people providing the lease. So
awesome. Well, we hope you've enjoyed the webinar. I thought it was really awesome, Phil. You really do know the industry and the history and so on, and that's just so incredible. And we thank everyone for spending the time today. We know you could do it at lots of other places, lots of other ways, and we really are very grateful that you chose to join us today. If you have any other follow-up questions, please contact Phil directly at the number or the email on your screen, and we will be back in touch. Again, thank you very much, and have a great day.